In this video, you will be introduced to perimeter. Perimeter is the distance around a shape. There are formulas for certain shapes, and then for other shapes, it's just a matter of adding up all of the sides. Now, even the shapes like rectangles and squares that have formulas, that just makes the calculations more efficient. And in some cases, it's how you need to find some of the information, like if you have a missing side. But anytime you're given all the sides of a shape, add them together and it gives you perimeter. Now, I like to describe where the formula for a rectangle comes from. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to just draw a rectangle, right? Rectangle, 4 sides. We're going to pretend that that looks like a rectangle. I always say to my students, it's not art class, this is math. So just bear with me on my lack of artistic ability. Anyway, so for a rectangle, the opposite sides are the same length. So let's say that these two sides are length, and so the other set of opposite sides we're going to call our width. Well, if we add all those together, right, we have L plus, and it doesn't matter the order because it's all addition, so commutative property of addition. I'm going to do my L plus W plus W. Well, that equals my perimeter. And going back to combining like terms, right, as we're simplifying. Well, we've got two L's here, so that gives us 2L plus 2W. 2W equals P. And basically a formula gives you a structure or a pattern that you can use if you don't know the numbers, right? And so we have variables there because we don't, at the moment, know the lengths for the sides, but once we do, then we can start actually finding missing information. Okay, so formulas are patterns or structures that you can always use based on what you're finding, right, and what the shape is. Okay, so for number 1, we have find the perimeter of the shape. Use the formula for the perimeter of a rectangle where it applies. So here's just a little hint. And as always, I write whatever the formula is, or if I'm simplifying, I write my GEMDAS, right? That's just to have my map that I'm going to use as a guide as I work through these. Okay, so here we have a rectangular garden, right? So that tells you the formula that, or at least the shape, which will define the formula based on what you're finding. So it says the garden has a length of 12 feet by 13 feet, right? So one is our width and one is our length. What is the perimeter? Well, the perimeter of a rectangle is this formula. I'm solving for the perimeter, so I have P equals 2 parentheses. Notice we're just doing evaluating again. I'm taking out the variables, and then I'm going to put the numbers in that I've been given. Because it's the commutative property, because it's addition, it actually doesn't matter which variable goes with which number if it isn't predefined. So you could do 2 times 13 plus 2 times 12 as well, and you end up with the same answer. So don't worry so much about what number goes with which variable if you're just given those dimensions. Okay, so here I get P equals. Now, order of operations always applies. So multiplication first, which gives me 24, right, plus 26. Now I get P equals 24 plus 26, which is 50. Now, when you're dealing in dimensions, you have to include units. Without units, there's no meaning to your answer, right? So if I didn't add the feet, that could be 50. It could be 50 yards. It could be 50 inches. But all of those are very different than feet. So an answer is not complete without a unit when you're dealing in perimeter or any other application problem, okay? All right, so if the wood border for the garden costs $15 per foot, how much would it cost to buy the border for the garden? All right, so if we have a total, so the border, right, is 50 feet, and every foot costs $15. Think for a second what operation that is, right? So if I have 1 foot, it costs me $15. 2 feet, it costs $30. 3 feet, $45, and so forth. So this is repeated addition, which means you can do multiplication, right? Because that is what multiplication is. So it's going to be 50, which is the length of border that you need, times 15 per foot. Okay, and I have 50 times 15. Now it's the cost of something, so my answer has to have a dollar sign. So I get $750 is the cost of the border for that garden. All right. So now a rectangle has a perimeter of 170 feet. If the width is 35 feet, what is the length? Okay, key words here, rectangle and perimeter. That gives me one formula. That's P equals 2L plus 2W. And we're actually given the answer for the perimeter, right? But whenever I'm given a problem that involves a shape, I will draw that shape, okay? Especially, or I tend to do that. It's always a good idea, especially like the previous one, we were given information and just plugged the information into the formula and solved for perimeter. But here we're given perimeter and it's one of the lengths we're looking for. So I'm going to draw my picture. All right, so I have 170 feet is the perimeter, right? So that's just to remind me that that's going to be the sum of all the sides. The width is 35, so we don't know the length. That picture helps me see how I'm going to use the formula. So I've been given P, right, the perimeter. So I replace P with the 170 that I was given. Then I have equals, right? So I just need to keep copying this. I have 2, and that's the 2 in the formula, but I don't have a value for L, right? So that's going to stay the same, plus 2 parentheses, parentheses, right? And then I put my 35 in. And that's the number that I've been given. Now I have an equation I need to solve. So let's go back to our steps for solving. Simplify each side using order of operations. So the left-hand side, there's no simplifying that can happen. So I'm just going to write that. 2L, there's nothing I can do with that yet. Plus, now I combine those, I multiply, and I get 70. I've fully simplified. So now notice, right, we started with the perimeter equation. We drew our picture. We substituted. Then we now simplified. And each of those things, right, evaluating or substituting, we're following the same process. Parentheses, replace the variable, and then we put the number in. Then we move to the first step of solving, which is simplify both sides. Now, using order of operations, now we go to working across the equal sign, which means we're doing opposite of order of operations. So we are basically scaffolding our knowledge, right? Everything that we've learned before, you're now using in a different context and with a different combination of tools is one way to think about it. Okay, so everything's fully simplified on both sides. So now we do reverse order of operations. which means I subtract 70, right? Because I have to get rid of my addition and subtraction first. Subtract. That goes away, and I'm left with 100 equals 2L. Just for more space, I'm going to write up here, right? And so now I need to get the L by itself, so I divide both sides by 2. And so 50, and don't forget your units, right? The length is 50 feet, and that equals L. So that is your final answer. Now, just like the previous problems that we were doing, right, we have a formula or an equation and we can check our answer. So don't forget, even in this context, you want to check. So that would look like basically this equation, right, where we have 170 equals 2L plus, or really it's this one is the ideal one where it's already simplified, and we have 70. Now we go ahead and substitute 50 in for this L, so we get 170 equals 2 parentheses plus 70. I substitute the 50 in, and I get 170 equals 100 plus 70, which is 170 equals 170. Now notice when I'm checking, I don't include the units because that to me just causes some confusion. So by not including them, you don't accidentally see them as a variable or something like that. So you usually see me do work without units, and then at the end, right, I go ahead and input the units for my answer. Okay, so this time we have a square has a side length of 8 meters. What is the perimeter? Well, for just a second, let's talk about a square. So the thing that makes a square unique, and again, not art class, so bear with me. A square, for a square or on a square, all sides are the same. So you can pick whatever variable you want. Let's say I'm just going to say that all of my lengths or sides are W, right? So in this case, because it's a square, this is the same as perimeter equals W plus W plus W plus W, just going back to the basic definition of perimeter. Well, P equals 4W. So that is a separate formula, although it's based on the addition of all sides still. So you could either think of squares as P equals 4W, or you can think of it as, because, so here's a little thing. Squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares, right? So your P equals 2L plus 2W can be used. Now, if you're finding perimeter, that's pretty straightforward. Like doing the 2L plus 2W is totally fine. If, however, you're finding a missing side, you're going to want to use the formula that I just showed you, right? The P equals 4W. Because here's how it looks. Well, we have the square. A side length is 8 meters, right? So we have P equals 4 times 8 meters equals 32 meters. Or because we're not finding a missing side, instead we are finding the perimeter, you could do P equals 2L plus 2W, but in this case, the L and the W are all the same because it's a square. Okay, so it would be 2 times 8, because that is the length of the sides, plus 2 times 8. That gives me 16 plus 16, which gives me 32 meters. And that is your final answer, okay? So now for 4, this is a good example of where using the P equals 4W is the best equation to use. Okay, so in this case, we have the perimeter. So perimeter of a square is 100 yards. What are the side lengths? I'm going to draw my picture. Here's my square-ish, right? I'm going to say W. My total length, right, or total distance is 100 yards. Okay, so my equation is P equals 4W. Well, I don't know my W this time. Instead, I know my P. So I get 100 equals 4W. Divide by 4. Divide by 4. And W equals 25 yards. And again, in the previous one, right, I didn't actually show it, but you can always substitute back in. So in this case, we know that perimeter, well, let's see, we started with this, right? 4, pull out the W, put in the parentheses, put in the answer that you got, and we get 100 equals 100. And that, 25 yards, is your final answer.